Why do you think we're just constantly obsessed with wanting an easy solution to complex problems?
What's actually happened here is that there are people who actually don't want, be straight, don't want solutions, you see. Somehow the perpetuation of the problem actually suits them.
Hello and welcome to TRIGGERnometry. I'm Francis Foster.
I'm Konstantin Kisin.
And this is a show for you if you want honest conversations with fascinating people.
A fascinating guest we have for you today. He was the chair of the commission which produced the Race and Disparities Report. Dr. Tony Sewell, welcome back to TRIGGERnometry.
Hi, it's nice to come back again after my debut some years ago.
Your debut was a couple of years ago and in rather more relaxed circumstances.
Yeah, you guys have gone up in the world since then, I must admit.
So have you, Tony.
Yeah, well, you know, it's been a bit interesting ride since I last saw you, you know. So
it has.
Things have happened since.
I mean, you are an education consultant. That's your thing. Yeah. Generating Genius is the charity. Yeah. That's what we talked about last time. And since then, the government asked you to produce a report on racial disparities in the UK. You produced the report. We had one of your commissioners, Mercy Muroki, on the show to talk about it. Yeah. But we were keen to have you back. And thank you for coming back to talk to us.
Sure.
What's it been like for you, first of all, just on an individual level? Because that report was not that well received in some quarters.
Well, that means it's doing quite well then, if it's like that. No, I mean, the people who need to receive it are the government. And I think that we want them to sort of obviously try to put all of the recommendations in place, but we're not a patsy for government. I mean, and they're going to find those recommendations tough and challenging. For me, I must admit, I think in terms of trying to explain what happened over that period, I think that misunderstanding might be one way of looking at it. But I do think that, you know, one of the interesting things about that is that I don't know how many people actually read that report. I mean, who reads reports in the end? And it's quite interesting that, you know, government commissions lots of these things, but the attention this had was interesting. And obviously it did happen as, you know, I mean, stimulated by the George Floyd murder. But then it was more than that, because it was about the UK and what happened here. I would say that what happened here was an I mean, in terms of what we were trying to do, first of all, before even getting to the reaction, I mean, the reaction was, I would disagree with you. I don't think it was actually all bad. I think what happened was that there were a lot of people who, when they did read it, liked it, and were very supportive of it. So we have that. But yes, people misunderstood it. And I think that was the thing. And why they misunderstood it was really going back to my debut, really, with you, and a sort of, they thought that what they had in terms of myself and my commissioners was a bunch of people who were just basically, you know, kind of, I don't know, sort of supporters of the Tory party, just basically Boris's mates or whatever. And he just cobbled together a few people and they were going to write a report for him and he was going to go home and be happy, you know. And actually, if they read the report, what they've missed was the complete opposite happened. And so in effect, what actually happened was that people responded to what they read in The Guardian or in the other papers, but they didn't actually read the report. So, for example, like, you know, people will say to you, "Oh, I don't like that report," or "They're denying racism," or whatever, but they never read it. They just said that. And so you think, wow, are we in a world now where people are not even going to just look at the thing? You know, even you know, some pages or some of the recommendations.
The answer is yes, Tony.
Well, you know what I'm thinking, given that you're right, not everybody reads reports, or very few people do. There'll be people watching this who maybe have got an open mind. They haven't read the report. They read some of the coverage. They don't know what happened. What were some of the key findings and the key recommendations that you made?
Well, let me tell you what really did stir up the problem for this, and why people didn't really think that they grasped it properly, or they grasped it wrongly, was that first of all, we were looking at 4 areas, really: education, employment, crime and policing, and health, right? Those are the 4. Right from the outset, we did say quite clearly in that report that there was persistent racism in the country. We weren't denying that. That came out straight away. That'd be the first interesting thing that came out. So that was one of the first findings, that racism exists and it's alive. But then what we did then was we said, but you can't just understand racism in isolation. It's connected to lots of other things. So, for example, socioeconomic backgrounds becomes the key element here. And then, you look at other things like the family, cultural factors, geography, where you live. And then what you do then is once you start looking at those other variables, and also you bring in the white group into this, because they actually happen to be human beings as well, and they're examined in the mix. Then you come out, you emerge with a report that basically says this, that overall, I mean, and this is sort of the key finding here, is that race disparities exist, but racism isn't the major driver for most of them. The major reason for most of them being there. So that's a kind of strange kind of tension, because you're saying that there's a racial disparity, but racism isn't the key element. What is the key driver in all of this is poverty, is your socioeconomic background. That's what drives the whole area. And if you look at I'll give you one particular group that doesn't fit in the whole kind of category. Also, the other thing is that you can't actually start, I mean, it's another finding, it's a pretty obvious one, that you can't just lump everybody together. So, for example, ethnic minority groups are all lumped together. So the experience of an Indian doctor in Harrow is a world away from a taxi driver in Bradford. You know what I mean? Yet, we categorize them as Asian.
Yeah.
Well,
these people are fighting a war back home, right? But here they're like one group. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense,
And so we clear. But one of the things that was quite interesting was the battle really in schools, from my own area, in education. And when we cut it and we said that, look, people were saying, look, all these black boys are being excluded, and all these black boys are doing so badly in school. But what do we mean by black? Because once we cut it and we said, right, let's split Black Caribbean and Black African. And then there was a world of difference. I mean, in terms of exclusion rates, Black African boys were hardly excluded. I think like 7 in 10,000 were being excluded for African, whereas Caribbean was 25 in 10,000. A huge difference. When it came to the exam results, African boys were I would say in terms of, we could put Progress 8 in school and GCSE results, way ahead. In fact, they were way ahead of white groups as well. Yeah, and Caribbean groups were worse than white groups in terms of some of the outcomes. So you say, here's a racial disparity. You can't no longer talk about black boys as a whole because they're not the same. And let's be honest, these same boys are in the same classroom, they come from the same estates, they're in front of the same white teacher, yet these results are diverging in different directions. So you no longer can say that the reason for black boys underachieving in school is teacher racism. You see, you have to go somewhere else to find the answer. And where we landed it was to do with, I mean, a couple of things, really. You can see it. It's landed in the poverty issues, yeah, but it's also landed in the family issues and some cultural issues as well. So, for example, if you were to then look at some data around, I want to put a health check on what I say here, because I do not think it's family style at all or single mothers to blame. And people will keep saying this. But I just think we have a recommendation around that as well. But if you just look at how those families are set up, I mean, 63% of the Black Caribbean, my communities, in inverted commas, are from lone parents. 63%. The African is 40, and Indian is 6. Then you only have to you only have to put those issues together in terms of poverty. And it's not that every lone parent is poor, but the vast majority of them are. Significant amounts are, because of the situation you're in. And it's not to say that you shouldn't be a single parent, but what we should then do as the commission is recommend resources for you. So what we were finding, so in terms of findings then, that's the key thing. The thing's complex. You can't just go out there and say, here is this race disparity equals racism. Yeah. The other thing, and I think this is probably the key driver, geography, where you live. And we saw this in this Hartlepool election that we saw recently. Of the neighborhood, of the 20 big poor neighborhoods that we have around the country, 19 of them are in the north, the poorest, right? And obviously a majority of that is white populations, yeah, and the poorest. There's also some on the south coast as well, but the majority of them are in the north. The other thing with that is that London and the south east comprise of, when it comes to social mobility, the highest mobility rates are happening in London and the southeast. So, you know, if you're a Bangladeshi girl in Tower Hamlets, you're flying in terms of exam results. If you're a Bangladeshi girl in Bradford, you're nearly at the bottom of the pecking order. So the where you live in the UK is a key determinant. So what people didn't want to hear was that message that this thing is complicated. They wanted us to say, look, Tony, look, don't give us any of this kind of nonsense. It's racism. That is the thing that's driving this thing. But and I'll come on to that in a minute. But we couldn't just say that because the evidence didn't take us there. You know, you go where the evidence took us to somewhere which was more complicated and needed more sophisticated answers. Now, in our world of identity politics, if you come up with anything that's complicated like this, or say that it's different variables, you can only be one thing. You're either in the race camp or you're out of it. Yeah, and that's it. And if you're out of it, that means you're a race denier, you're a Judas, you've betrayed your race, whatever. Now, you know, to me, I think there's some links in America here. And I was thinking of this the other day. We're not the same as America, and we do import some of the things that are bad there in terms of our thinking. But I think African Americans and black, or what I think has emerged out of here, the group that looks like it's like an equivalent to an African American is my community, Black Caribbean, and that is the thing that sticks out here. Now people say, "Oh, you're dividing all people and you're dividing black from white," but the data is showing all these elements to be the truth.
And we're talking about it. And why do you think it's something as simple as the fact that that Black Caribbean, especially Black Caribbean boys, are less likely to grow up with a dad in their house, and then the impact that has?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to throw you at that because people have associated me with trying to explain away these problems by landing it on black women, as it were. And I don't think it's there. I don't think the problem is there. I think when we cut this, it's a factor. I'm not denying that in terms of poverty, but that would be a factor for single white women in Hartlepool. You know, it's a factor for everybody. What I think goes wrong is the history of that community. What came up in our kind of thing, our kind of findings was this issue of trust. Now, if you go back to like the Windrush period, and then there was, when I grew up, it was in the sort of 70s. That was kind of the rebel period with the police, and those two kind of periods of kind of, I would say, quite heavy trauma for a community. Yeah, you know, because if you can imagine it, you come all the way from Jamaica or Trinidad or Barbados. You've been begged to come over. People have asked you to come here, yeah, and then you land here and you get all this crap. You know, immediately, no, don't come here, don't go back home. But you've been asked to come here. I mean, it's really interesting about migration. This set of people must be historically for Britain. Enoch Powell went on a campaign to the Caribbean and begged people to come over there to Britain. One of the things that was interesting when my parents came here, and this is going to be dynamics about poverty, is that they were surprised to see how poor white people were. They were shocked because they thought all white people were rich. So they didn't. That thing was that stung in their heads, and I think that whole issue goes on about. It's translated to this horrible word called white privilege, because they still think that nothing bad can happen to white people. Somehow they're blessed with this kind of thing of privilege from the gods or something. And I do think that resonates. So you come into the country and you get this bad experience. Then your kids get crap in school as well, and the police and all of that. So you have a community that looks very much like an African-American one as well. It looks like it's one that's completely outside of the society, because it has this mental thing about we can't trust it at all. Unless you have the anti-vax thing, which is interesting, because we can't trust it because we can't trust anything that the government gives because they're giving it for free, and that couldn't be right, And so there's that kind of thing. Now you compare that to the more recent arrived sort of West African, somebody from Nigeria, and we call it immigrant optimism, that comes in and just sees, well, they haven't got all that historic baggage at all. They just come in and say, wow, right, free education, wow, let's go for it. Teachers, pens, books, things that you have to pay for back home or wherever, is all free, and you get paid. I mean, in my day, when they actually paid you to go to university. I mean, it's a bit different now, but so all these resources are there for you,
right.
And so the mentality is go for it. And so those young people from those African backgrounds will have parents and people around them saying, look, there is no history here. Just work hard and do well. And they are doing well. Yeah.
Tony, isn't there another factor here though as well, which people who are critics of yours would want to talk about a lot, which is the legacy of slavery? The Afro-Caribbean community are by definition descended from slaves who were taken to North America and the Caribbean, right? Whereas a West African probably wasn't descended. And so that generational disadvantage, the legacy of it.
I don't buy that.
You don't buy that?
No. Here's the thing. I spent half of my life in Jamaica. Yes, I'm lucky I have the two places to go to. So I'll be whizzing off soon away from this cold place. It's getting warm now. But and one of the interesting things is about class, and it's about class and poverty. If you look at the migration to America from, say, like Jamaica, and you go to there's a university called the University of West Indies, 80% of the graduates don't stay. Once they got their degrees, they go to the US. Those graduates will, and people professionally as well, will go in and they occupy top jobs in America. So what you've got is a Caribbean middle class they're the doctors, they're the lecturers. I mean, more than lecturers, professors, they're running things, And so you've got a solid black middle class that's been going to America all the time. They haven't been coming here. What happened here was basically, people came here in the 1950s. They were poorer and stayed poor-ish, yeah, and was linked really to the white working class that was here, and it's the socioeconomic issue
and the way they were treated when they arrived.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Whereas in fact, it's a quite interesting tension now. It's quite interesting when you compare what goes on towards the US from the Caribbean compared to what went on migration towards the UK. African Americans sometimes are quite resentful of Caribbeans. They look at them as almost like the elite, almost like you would say, like, for example, the Indian population here, for example. They looked at as an elite-ish kind of proposition over there. So so the slavery thing is interesting. I'm not saying it's a factor, but you can see that what is driving it, I think, is how you then come into a country, how you migrate into a country, and then how if you are going to be socially mobile inside that country. What happened to my community is we just got stuck. We just got stuck alongside, without being, negative here, with the rest of the white working class that were here as well. We just got stuck here. And I think that, yes, you could talk about there was some more privilege for those white working class people, but essentially they were already stuck as well. They were stuck. So slavery is a factor, but it's not the driver here. It's always about, so there is something inside Britain about how it allows people to actually move through the gears fast, and how you can get stuck in this. And what are the reasons why? Our school system was one of the reasons why we got so stuck, because it operated on a level where if you didn't pass your 11 plus or whatever. I mean, that happens in the Caribbean as well. Or, you were stuck in these secondary schools. I was stuck in one of those as well. And to get out of those things was hard, And then it had, I mean, when I went to university, 5% of the population from poor backgrounds went to university. Only 5. It was a middle class kind of, provision. It wasn't for poor people. Only recently we've been going to university in big numbers since Blair opened it up. So so the issues, and this is what comes back to the issue about my report, was that what was dangerous for me in the report and why I've been the black Satan, as it were, or the black Christ on the cross, whatever I am, was that I dared bring class into this. I dared bring family and all these other elements into the race thing, because all they wanted to see here was pure race. And they wanted they wanted to run from slavery right the way through to racism. And it's just not that simple, you see.
You see, and it's a very, very good point. You're saying it's not that simple. Why do you think we're just constantly obsessed with wanting an easy solution to complex problems?
Because we don't want solutions. You see, the people inside, what's actually happened here is that there are people who actually don't want, be straight, don't want solutions, you see. Somehow the perpetuation of the problem actually suits them. It's a really strange mentality. But because when you ask them, and this is the thing about the report that I think people don't like, is the 24 recommendations are progressive, they're radical, yeah? And they're about solutions. And
give us a flavor, Tony, again, for people who haven't read the report. What are some of the key recommendations?
Well, the first one to kick off, which is the one that's interesting, is that we ask the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, who are the police really for racism, the agency that deals with all of that. We want them to be more robust and have more powers. So that was the first recommendation. And then we said on top of that you've got to do with the online racism that's going on as well, that Marcus Rashford and all these other people are talking about. Now, and I asked both of you, did a report that was meant to be on race and ethnic disparity, recommending that the agency that actually does deal with racism has more powers, and that the government have got to deal with online racism. That is the first recommendation. How did that come to be marked as denying racism? Where did they lost their heads? And what I think's happened, that's one recommendation. But we didn't stop there. We went after the robots as well, because the AI and all artificial intelligence, all the kinds of things that you would do in terms of coding that could be biased, we asked the government look into that and make some changes, like insurance, things like that, how you calculate all these other things. We wanted that whole, so that's deep-seated kind of racism you're going after there. So when people began, that's a recommendation too, and I can keep going, yeah? I mean, I'll come to a couple in a minute, but if you just pick up those two, yeah? I suggest what happened here was that we caught friendly fire, and it was unfriendly, if you see what I mean. So the people who thought, as you come back, that in fact the recommendations were going to be soft or whatever, didn't know or didn't want to know that the first recommendation that came out was about anti-racism. It was about that. So what this government's got to do, and this is why I don't really understand where the criticism could have come from, because the Labour Party would love this. It's for them. You have a recommendation that's saying that agency has got to be tougher, have more resources, go after on. And already the government are doing it because they're changing the law now. But now we're going to have Facebook. We're going to have Twitter. Really be serious about this. Otherwise, they're going to get fined heavily. Yeah? And so that's what we recommended.
Hold on, Tony, but aren't you being a bit naive, if you don't mind me saying so, about why people were critical? Because they were critical because they wanted you to come out and say the country is institutionally racist, the police are all racist, the education system is racist, employers are all racist. because that's the worldview that they already have, and they wanted you to confirm that. And when you didn't, that's why they got angry.
I think you've got the world record for racist in one question.
But you know, you go with the evidence. I've painted a more complex.
But these people don't
that.
go with the evidence, though.
Yeah, I mean, I've painted a more nuanced picture than that.
Yeah,
and you have to. And look, it doesn't solve the problems. You see, for example, if there is racism in the police, and that's a fact, and we've got strong recommendations for that. But you can't then just say that if you're gonna deal with the issue of the family, you have to have recommendations that's really specific for that, and deal with that, and not kind of dodge it, because in the end you can just say, okay, let's do more unconscious bias training in schools. If you think all teachers are racist, we've tried that. It's a complete waste of time. Yeah, because the problem isn't with the teachers in that regard. The issue is with the capacity of the family to deal with some of these problems. And what we did, we brought out a recommendation that said we want, and this is a very strong one, government got to think hard about that. We want a task force for the family that's going to give. So in the end, what will happen is, in real terms, those African Caribbean mothers or lone parents will actually get more resources as a result of this report. I mean, it's just as flatline as that. They will get more help for that. But we won't say, oh, we're going to have more trainers come in to teach and tell them how, try and pull out the racism out of their heads or something. I don't know, but that's not working. You know, that's not where the problem lies. Because African children are just doing really well in that system and flourishing in it. And so you just have to go where the evidence takes you. It's not about bias and you're right. Those things that people wanted you to say and didn't say, that's the thing, you know. And they really didn't want a complex, nuanced thing about this. They just wanted you to yell, you know, the world is racist. And a lot of companies went along with this as well, and they kind of just, because it suited them to kind of say, well, look, we'll put our George Floyd kind of thing on our Black Power thing on our kind of logo tomorrow, and they'll go back and do the same practice, because Black people are not progressing in those organisations either. You see, so it doesn't matter how kind of, you know, you put out these gestures, it doesn't make any difference, because the real issue around progression as well in those companies, you could argue, well, you know, okay, is it racism that's stopping those people progressing, or is it something else that's going on? You know, and then you look at back to what I said about this history of this group and what happens in there, and how you feel, in a sense, do I belong here? Do I really belong here? And then if the opportunity is there, are you empowering those people to progress, rather than sticking labels on an organization and saying you are this or you are that? When in fact the real problem is, maybe, or part of the problem could be about getting those people to really now begin to think about, how can I have the confidence to go through this difficult organization? And I think that really is the problem.
But it's also as well, Tony, I mean, let's be fair, Windrush did a tremendous amount of damage to, you know, particularly Caribbean people's trust in the government. Do you not think? It was just another example for them of them being let down by the government. And it's still happening now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that what you've got to do is you've got to not put people... I mean, one of the things in the report that I think was really good is that it didn't only just land it on one area. And this is one of the things that people think. They think, oh, you're only on this side and you don't look at the other argument. And because it's nuanced and complex, racism exists. So we're not saying that it's not an element. And we're not saying that teachers aren't racist either. Yeah. But you have to look at where it lands. So Windrush is a key aspect of it, in terms of something that went wrong and something that definitely has elements of racism in there. But even there, you see, what's sad about the Windrush is that it only is known for the fact that for a legacy, this was the thing that where people got ripped off. It's not known for the rich legacy of Caribbean people. It's now labelled with that. So again, you've got to try. We've got to try and think of another way of getting some balance there, because it isn't only about those people getting ripped off. It's also about the contributions of my parents' generations, the positive ones, you see. So, yes, but you are right. And what you've got to do is almost go down a twin track with this and say there are other nuanced issues that you've got to deal with, and you also got to deal with the institution. And that's why we've put these recommendations out for number one is the body that polices this thing is going to get fully loaded. You know, I mean, anybody's seen that first recommendation, like, what on earth? Why are these people jumping up and down? You know, that's a key recommendation for what you're talking about.
Yeah. So let's talk about policing, because one of the things that I took away from our first interview with you is how balanced you are as you are now. You were then, and you talked about your own experience growing up in this country when, you know, a black man had committed a crime. Suddenly everybody within an area was being arrested or stopped by the police. So, you know, and we know friends, we've got friends in comedy or whatever who will talk about, by the time I was 25, I'd been stopped by the police 15, 20 times. So what were some of your findings and some of your resulting recommendations in that area, which I think is a concern to a lot of people?
Yeah, I mean, the policing one was an interesting one, because what we did there, that was really about trust. And again, keep coming back to this community, that it's not that African people aren't going to get stopped as well, but that trust element for a community along the years, especially in the 70s, the police have, you know, got to do a lot of catching up. And so what we found was that the building of that trust was needed. So what you needed to do really was give the community a sense that the police was a service rather than a force, and that they were actually part of, you know, the policing themselves. You know, there are some issues though about how you do that. So we came up with safeguarding task force, which was a kind of safeguarding group, which was this sort of it's a group that actually can hold the police commissioners, can hold the you know, those who are in the top management of police. They come to that group and they have to then regularly explain how they're doing, what their operations are. So the community itself has a power over that group, and that was key. But we wanted to find very practical recommendations, not theoretical ones. One of the ones also we insisted is that the police turn on their video that they have, the body cams, yeah, and that in fact that would be compulsory, because at the moment it seems to be like it's voluntary. Oh, I forgot to turn it on, Gov. You know? Yeah. So, but you have to have it on all the time. And that's a key element in terms of people feeling secure about that interaction. I think the other one that is interesting is there's some of the training around police, and I've seen this in teaching as well. De-escalation training. You know, how you saw that interaction that you have, particularly with young people. How do you make that better? So the training has got to be much more focused. The two radical ones, which the government will find hard, but they're going for, and I think this is the one that people again are surprised when they see it, is we've insisted on what we call residency. This is to make the police more representative of the area that you're in. So, for example, if you're at the moment, we have a police force that is particularly on the white side. I mean, the Asian side's a bit more balanced. There's hardly any black people actually in London. The numbers are sort of really small at the moment. And so there's a 40,000 uplift that they've been now given, so to get more officers. So what we've directed is that the police officers have to come from the area, you know, that you live in. So if you're going to join the police, you're going to join them from in your area. So for example, if you look at an area like Tottenham or Lambeth, then we have to have police officers who live in that area joining. I mean, it's not exclusively, but they will get. Now, that's a significant change, because that will mean that the actual force, the complexion of the force will change, because it will represent the communities. That's radical. The Met have already taken that up and they're going for 40%. They're going to increase that. And I know Cressida Dick has said that she wants to do that. But we want it across the country. So it doesn't. So don't get me wrong. If you're in Cornwall, it doesn't mean that you have to find 1,000 black officers in Cornwall. But if you're in a situation, you'll be looking around. But if you're in Tottenham, which at the moment is, you go out there, or in Croydon, and probably 90% of the officers are white, and the community is 80% ethnic minority. It doesn't reflect that. So what we're saying is that should change. People have asked me, is that affirmative action backdoor? No, but it's actually looking at the skill set of that community and saying that it should reflect that. Yeah, but we don't stop there. One of the other radical ones is to do with the possession of Class B drugs. Now, what's actually happened is that because black communities are over-policed, when those police officers go on looking for, say, knives or whatever, the issue is that...
Tony, can I just stop you there? I know it's a very important point you're making, but I just want to... I'm listening to you through the eyes of a critic to some extent, and I want to say, well, you say they're over-policed. Why are they over-policed?
Well, this is it. They're over-policed because we have a situation where 24 times more likely to die, really, of homicide. Black males are likely to be victims of homicide compared to their white counterparts. So that's 24 times more. As a black man, you're likely to die of homicide or homicide with death. But I mean, we're talking really about a knife crime. We're talking about a murder. Yeah, and I say that with hesitancy, but that's it. 24 times more than any other group. It's probably the most kind of, for us, in terms of findings, we were almost in tears with that one, because why we were moved by that was nobody really cares. And I say that, and I don't say that flippantly. I think that we've reached a point with knife crime. 21 community, one set of ethnicity, 24 times getting homicide compared to the majority, compared to the white population. Nobody really cares. And I say that because we've reached a kind of point now where we're fairly indifferent about another black youth dying of knife crime. We just say, well, we just expect. And here's where the indifference gets even more interesting. In London, when you hear about a knife crime, you automatically think it's a black person, 2 black kids doing it. You don't even think twice. You don't think it could be a white person. You just think everybody in the newsroom, everybody thinks, oh, it's going to be 2 black kids doing this, or a group of black kids on another one. And so we've reached a point of indifference in this that's unacceptable.
Why is it, Tony, that, and I agree with you, when I was a teacher in Newham, which has a huge gang problem. And I remember one of my students telling me that he was in trouble and he was going through a bit of former students and telling me that they were looking to remove him from one school to the next. And I said, are you happy about that, fresh start, all the rest of it? And he went, no, because they'll murder me. Why is it that we get more upset about some poor unfortunate soul being murdered in Minneapolis than we do about young black boys dying in our own city? I'm not gonna be pushed in, because I can see a headline coming here in the newspaper, and I'm not gonna answer the question how you've put it, right? Because I don't want journalists listening to this to try and do a sneaky on me. Yeah.
Damn.
But
Think of the clicks, Tony. Come on.
Come on.
Yeah. No. What I will say is what I said before about the fact that we've become, kind of cold to this now, because it's too close to home, and we don't. And see, when it comes to solutions, you see,
we don't know what to do. That's the real truth.
We
think there's nothing that can be done.
That's right. And in a sense, it's that's the problem here, in a way that has become. And I've written about this before in the past, as you know, and it's become an issue for us that we can't. I'm more kind of worried. Not so much about the solutions to it, but the fact that people just accept it. And who I'm really cross with is the BBC. Everyone's having a go at them. Let's take another piece out of them now. And I think that their attitude towards, for example, what I've seen when it's been reported, the way they report these things is interesting, because there is a sense in which they're not delving into the reasons why. They're almost frightened to go there and talk about some of the community dynamics around this. And also my community is probably embarrassed by it. And also there's another thing. It's easier to, in a sense, it's all about devils really, to find that devil again in the white person and the white community or whatever it is, or the white privilege. But when it comes home, it's just, it's like, oh, what am I going to do? So what I've heard some things that people put it on cuts, kind of cuts in terms of grants and things like that, and austerity. People desperately trying to find different things to explain, and it's not. I mean, actually, we've got some data that showed that actually knife crime was at its height when austerity was at the bottom, when Labour were in power and there was no austerity, and knife crime peaked. There is no relationship really between the two things. So we come back to, there is a relationship in one way. I'm going to contradict myself. There's a relationship, yes, in terms of some poverty, and I think there is, but there's also another thing going on, because you can't just lay on poverty alone. That has to be to do with maybe stuff in the family, maybe stuff also to do with some mental health issues. And I think also there are some cultural factors as well. All of those things wrapped up.
And in the police, when I interrupted you before, you were saying because the black community is over-policed, and you've now explained why, because there is this problem going on, right? Because of that, more people are stopped, and therefore more people are found to have drugs, and then people end up with criminal records. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what we've done. So in order to avoid that problem, I say innocent, but certainly black kids who are just not involved in knife crime but get caught with possession, what we're saying, and it's a strong recommendation and it's a radical one, is that they should be diverted to something else, in a sense of diversion activities, but not having a criminal record. Because that's the problem. You're getting so many black youngsters being caught in this problem. And see, it wouldn't happen to you if you were a student at Oxford University.
Right.
Because you wouldn't be so over-policed.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't catch you and they probably take more drugs than anybody. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a question of fairness. So, and also they would probably get better lawyers or whatever. And in the end, those kids, we don't want them to have a criminal record. So what we've asked to go down the health route. We want something. There's got to be a consequence. You can't just have them be possessed, because we're not going down decriminalisation, but we're saying that the consequence, we hope, will not be criminal, a criminal justice one in a sense, but it will be a health one. And obviously you have to admit your guilt. So in a sense, and the police have welcomed this, funny enough. They it wasn't just something.
Well, of course, they don't want to run around locking up people who've got a bag of weed in their pocket. That's not
and
what
also
they signed up for.
They can deal with that quickly and then move on to trying to find the real knives and the real criminals. I mean, there is some pushback on this. Look, we're not naive. We know that a lot of kids are out there with those bags of weed or whatever, and they're selling it. We do know that. We're not naive. Keith Fraser, over 30 years of policing, it was one of the commissioners. He understands all of that. However, we balance that with the idea that there is this kind of almost stream of kids going into the criminal justice system, and then once they're in there, then that's worse because they get caught up in other things, and so that was a way of stopping it. So look. You get to that one and you ask, where on earth did this backlash on the report come? Because so far I've outlined some stuff that even a Labour government would sweat on, So I come back to this idea that they gave us friendly fire because of who we were. They thought that there was a preconception that they thought that this was going to be, we were just going to chuck the government some easy things to do, and we were controlled by the government. When in fact we were fiercely independent. And we are giving them a hard time. You know, we've put something in here called the extended school day. You know how much that's going to cost the government millions of pounds. You imagine giving, but the reason why we put the extended school day was to help those single parents. Because, you know, you think about a single parent now, if she knows that her son her daughter is going to have an extended school day, that means they can do debating, they can make films like you guys, they can do things that will help their social mobility in that extended time. Now, who's going to pay for that? You know, so these are interventionist things, dare I say, socialist things that are in the recommendation. The thing is as left as anything, you know, and so this is you can see my sort of how kind of frustrated I am with it, because in a way what they've done is they've sent a message to communities about something that is going to help them. And only because they didn't say it or whatever, or they didn't read it or they didn't want to know, they've made the thing negative. When in fact, what should be happening now is everybody should be getting behind these recommendations and really kind of pushing the government and making sure that they're going to put it in place.
Hey Francis, do you think it's cool that the same company that controls 50% of online retail also passively eavesdrops on every conversation you have in your home?
What?
What about the idea that a single company controls 90% of internet searches and gets to track everything you do on your smartphone?
I'm so screwed.
You are. TRIGGERnometry is now going to be a solo project. Big tech is more powerful than most countries are, and they profit by exploiting your personal data. It is time to put a layer of protection between your online activity and these tech juggernauts. That is why I use ExpressVPN.
My career's over.
Unfortunately so. Sadly, every site you visit, every video you watch, every message you send gets tracked and data mined. But when you run ExpressVPN on your device, the software hides your IP address, something big tech can use to personally identify you. So ExpressVPN makes your activity harder to trace and sell to advertisers.
Finished. Absolutely done.
And the best part is how easy it is to use. Download the app on your phone or computer, tap just one button, and you're protected. Francis, please stop crying. My new shoes are getting wet.
If you don't want to end up like me and want to protect yourself from big tech, go to expressvpn.com/trigger and get 3 extra months for free. That's expressvpn.com/trigger to learn more. And do you sometimes get frustrated with people, particularly on the Labour Party, who purport to have those communities' interests at heart, and then they do or say like the examples that you've given, and actually they're not helping their community?
You see, this is where, again, I'm going to be very political here and say that Harriet Harman came on and she liked what we were doing. You know, probably hates it now. I don't know what she's going to say, but she was quite interesting. And people are, Harriet Harman. But she could see where this was going. And what she really liked was giving the teeth to the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, making them look like the old CRE, real kind of just go for racism, get that online stuff stopped. So there clearly are people inside that party that want to do things that are positive, but they've got themselves in a mess, and particularly with the Hartlepool thing as well, where they appear to not even like working class people. It's a strange thing for a party,
Called Labour.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not party political. I'm independent of that.
I know.
But I'm just saying that here's where I think it's a good thing for Labour to do. If they were really kind of focused, what they should do is get behind this report and really push the government. Say, look, this is a really solid report, and you've commissioned. Are you going to put these things in play? That's. So for us, that was where it is. But the policing thing is an interesting one. If this report results in more black and ethnic, particularly more black police on the beat going on there, and actually also not on the beat, but progressing in that force and coming up there, and detectives and things like that. They're there, but they just need to be there in more number, And I think it's an interesting area for the community to. It's not that, black kids need to be policed by people who look like them, but they've got to see somebody that looks like you, and the police want this to happen. The government want it to happen. We're giving them a kick up the backside and saying that you've got to do it now. You've got to mandate this. It's got to happen.
But it's also as well, when the thing that I found very interesting was talking about stop and search.
Yeah. Now we've because of this thing, but the issue that there's some people who say you should stop and search doesn't have any kind of positive outcome. It makes black youth kind of feel depressed and they're pressured by it, and there's racism involved. We agree, all of these things happen, but on the day when, for example, there was a case where one poor kid was stabbed 48 times. I don't know if you come across that case, by a couple of kids, 48 times, and that lone parent, or or it may not be a lone parent, it could be, not that case, but the family or whoever's around that boy, they would want us to go off on that evening, that same night, and find those knives and find those criminals, those perpetrators of those crimes. So in a way, it's almost like the police have to use that tactic. And we say, fair enough, but do it properly. Do it fairly. Do it in a manner that doesn't also criminalize those kids that you find en route who've got some weed, So all of those elements, make sure your body cam is on, use de-escalation tactics when you're doing it, So I think that we want it, but we want it done fairly.
It sounds like a lot of the things you're talking about are a way of just adjusting elements of the current system to improve it, to make it better. And I think maybe that's where some of the sort of unfair pushback has come, is where people have just want you to tear the system down and build a great new utopia in its place. It certainly seemed that way to me. But I want to move on a little bit, Tony, and talk about the media's role in all of this, because what did you make of the way that this report was covered by journalists whose job it is to give an objective reading of what you've presented?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened here, again, it comes back to the prejudice around the report. It was clear that there's some sections of the media wanted to take it down before it was even written, because they didn't really like the fact that who was composed in there, myself, whatever.
Why not? Why don't they like
it? Because maybe they thought that I was just some patsy for the Conservative Party.
Right.
Yeah. And they're wrong. They didn't think it through. So what happened was that they put resources towards trying to sort of bring it down. And they never really addressed any. It's quite interesting. They never addressed any of the recommendations. There's one in there for an Office for Health Disparity, which we've never had in this country before, which really is gonna significantly help black and ethnic minorities live longer and be healthier. Because you've got a targeted now agency that's going to do that. And I think they conceded that wasn't bad. So it's hard to describe the media, because, to be honest, there were other sections of the media that really came out and said they were for this and it was much needed. Yeah, and of course others that didn't. I was disappointed by the BBC, their coverage of this. I'll name them because I think they need to be. They didn't come back and look at those recommendations. I mean, one of the things the media missed, which if I was a journalist, I just don't know why they didn't go after it, which was this whole issue of the Class B drugs. I mean, that is a massive story.
Yeah.
Because you're teetering on. So why did they miss a government recommendation about the fact that young people could be in a position now where the police are going to not put them in the criminal justice system, but divert them? Or, why would you miss that just to go on some kind of, I don't know, journey about language that we use around race? You see, they're so obsessed with identity politics that they even missed the juicy story in the report. This is the kind of thing that is strange. There were so many stories inside those recommendations.
Do you think that's part of the problem, that we now view everything through the lens of identity politics, that we can't really be objective anymore?
No, or even see something that looks like a great story for you. It just blocks everything. And so what it was there were the bad guys over there that basically they don't believe in racism, whatever. They're the deniers, and I hate to say this in a sense, but a significant amount of white journalists from a particular point of view were going to police that, and tell the rest of the community what they should hear. And I think that's really what was going on. And then the community just hears these things. It gets on the Twitterati, and that's it. These are the groups of people that deny the reality of racism, when in fact the first recommendation was to strengthen the body that polices racism. I mean, you couldn't, as they say, you couldn't make it up. So to me, yeah, we're in a crazy place at the moment.
And do you think that this report and the legislation that's going to be put in place is going to help to calm things down? Or do you think that we've gone, I mean, not through the looking glass, but almost halfway through?
Here's the irony of the whole thing, which makes me kind of feel confident and happy. Funny enough, because of the controversy around it and the whole thing, the government are going to be really pressured now to look seriously at these recommendations. So I actually think in a strange sort of way, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to get full house on this. So in a way, for me, it's great. And I believe that we may have to have a part 3 here where I come back, because they're coming back to, I've never seen record time, July. That's record time for any commission. Most of these people who do commission, they have to wait 3 years to hear anything if they do. We're in July to hear it. So my expectations are high that we will get. So what's the result? That racism, and particularly online, Marcus Rashford's going to be really happy.
Well, they lost.
He's on the football, but he's won on the kind of online racism.
Yeah.
I mean, the less black kids are going to get in the criminal justice system. You're going to have a situation where more black single mothers are going to get more cash in their hands or whatever they're going to get. You're going to have an Office for Health Disparities going to look at the real health conditions around black and ethnic minority people and white working class people generally. I mean, you have a whole kind of range of, significant practical solutions, this is the thing, you see. Nobody wants to go down, we can actually put some answers to some of these things, or at least no, we don't want it. We want to come back to identities and stuff like that, and training for this and whatever, And,
well, there's people making a few quid out of it, aren't there?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's the problem. We've got an industry here, and so and I think that those people, ordinary, and I always want to appeal to just ordinary people, who can see the common sense in this and can see that they will benefit or not. That's how you judge it, And we're going to force this government to do that. We're not patsy with this government. They're going to have a hard time putting this across the line. Believe me, a conservative government diverting, drugs possession is unheard of.
Yeah. Well, I know your hands are probably somewhat tied, or maybe you don't like the war on drugs is something that I think is not a good idea personally, and we've talked about this with others a lot. And you can totally see how not criminalizing people for possession of drugs that they're not even trying
Class
to...
B drugs, of course.
Class B. Yeah. How that would help. And you mentioned America. Do you think a lot of the way that we've seemed to have started to have these conversations in a way that I don't think we used to have in this country. Do you think a lot of that is just taking the American discourse and just importing it here?
Yes, absolutely. I think that particularly in my sector, the university sector, they've got to be so careful. They've got to be so careful because, our universities are great places, and I really enjoyed being in them, amongst them. But we've just got to be so careful that we don't. I think what's gone wrong is that they think they're I think it's something to do also with that $9,000 as well. I mean, that is a big issue, that the students, the power that the students have with that
They
money.
pay, therefore they're the customer.
Therefore, that's really what's going on here. Believe me, if the students weren't paying, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I think that's the driver here. And I think they think that the students want, and so there's a sort of sense that they don't want to almost kind of, injure the students, in terms of their sense of identity and what they want. So they're trying to please everybody, and they end up pleasing anybody, really. And I think lecturers also have got to be careful in this as well. So, and that comes from the American campus coming here, as well. So I do think that we should be more robust in that. And I'm not somebody who, and again, I get caricatured as someone who doesn't, who doesn't think that there should be a balance here. I do think that universities should, there are times when, there could be people who are not welcome, but very rarely. I would say it's very rare, So, yes, I think you're right. It is coming a bit from the US. I do think that we should be careful about that, and I do think that that's something that I'm hoping that the UK now, and this report really, in a sense, is looking at the UK lens. And as I've spoken about the nuances, both of you have recognised things that are inside the UK, nuances that we know about inside. And it's not the same as America. Some of it's similar, but it's not the same. The way in which class operates here, and the way in which we, our schooling system and everything else. There are similarities, but there are differences as well.
Tony, you talk about history a little bit when you were talking about, quote unquote, your community, Afro-Caribbeans coming here, etc. History has been a big topic over the last year in this country, in relation to race in particular. What are your thoughts on some of the conversations that are being had about that, the importance of teaching history through a particular angle, or focusing on certain things, or avoiding certain things, or whatever? Like, what have you made of that debate?
Well, one of the things that is interesting with, and I can see a particular way in which history, in a strange sort of way, I got a really, it wasn't a bad, I had a crap school, but the history stuff was quite good. And what happened was that we had an old Marxist that taught us history, which was great, really, because more and more I'm beginning to, you would have believed that. Maybe I'm just a closet Marxist, because what he did was, Christopher Hill, all these other people, those kind of historians, they looked at the Industrial Revolution, and saw that there were parallels. It's not like for like, because no way was it the same. But we were taught about the fact that working class people in this country, from women working in the 19th century in those horrible kind of making matches in the Bryant May factories, to kids going up chimneys, to the factories in Manchester, and all of those kinds of Industrial Revolution things were going, as well as the slavery that was in the Caribbean, and so we got a range of Britain really as an imperial force that was fairly negative in that sense, and we got that, and we understood that, and we had a good, but we had great debates around it, so we were well schooled on that, and what was clear was that there were drivers of class and race going on at the same time. We got that notion in terms of history. What history has become a bit is it slipped into the identity politics element now, because what tends to happen is you're teaching people history because you want them to feel good. You know what I mean? So what happens is the history becomes like a psychological kind of thing. So it's not really history about facts and understanding how things happen, dynamic. What you're trying to solve a couple of problems at the same time, and they're not really the same problem. So, for example, people's sense of feeling mistrust to the society and their trauma around dealing with Britain, I think that should be dealt with separately almost than what you do in history, because we've come up in the report with the making of modern Britain. So what we've tried to do is produce a history that looks at the complex again, involvement of Britain in terms of the empire, but also in terms of some of the positives as well. You know, you just work the two things together. But also, we want to look at local history as well for working class white kids. What is the history of Lancashire? What's the history of, Middlesbrough? What's your local history? So you get a sense of, and then the kids in Middlesbrough learning about perhaps what happened in the Caribbean, and the kids in Brixton learning about, the history of Lancashire. It's a whole sort of sense of, and then of course the ancestral histories as well. Lots of things we want a lexicon around Indian words that come, sort of words that have come from subcontinent into the modern language. The positive influences that you have. So I think the answer to your question is that I think what we need to do is have a better. It's not changing the curriculum, but have a better sense of the forces that make modern Britain, and they're complex and they're interesting. And they're not always negative. So it's not just let's burn all the books that are to do with dead white men and then leave all the rest to look at. It's not that process at all. It's actually looking at the influences. So for example, I'll give you one example of this, which is interesting. We Caribbean writers came over here in the 1950s, lots of them. And a lot of their influences was Shakespeare, was the classics. And if you look at the books that they read and who they were influenced, you look at their biogs, they have a positive view, even though they were anti-colonialists. At the same time, they acknowledge the influence of Britain on them. Yeah. So you can't then just indoctrinate kids to say, look, all of this was a bunch of evil, and all of this is just good. It's a complex mixture of both things coming together, and I think that's how I would like us to see history.
And it's also about acknowledging, okay, the British Empire did do a lot of bad, but you know what? All empires do. The Ottomans weren't woke.
Yeah.
No.
No.
They didn't talk about intersectional identity politics. Neither did Genghis Khan, all the rest of it.
What you've got to do with this is, and it's really. I heard somebody say once, a teacher says that he was priding himself on teaching a history where there was no European contact. And I said, I was wondering, what does that mean? So what he wanted to do was teach the kids about Africa pre-slavery. And what he missed there was, I agree. I think you can teach history pre-slavery, and you go into another history and you want to talk about, I don't know, Egyptians and pyramids and things like that, which is interesting. I think there is, and he felt that the kids needed to understand history that was longer and that was stronger, and that was blacker. Really, that's really what we're talking about here. And in effect, that kind of dodges some things, because I used to teach in the Caribbean and here, and what I realized about Caribbean kids was they were much more confident than my kids here the same year. And when I looked at the history curriculum, what they did was they didn't dodge slavery. What they did was they actually talked about how, in Jamaica in particular, people retained their humanity within the inhumanity. So, for example, you open up those slave ledgers and you see all that the accountant would have, the pigs, the goats, and then somebody named Sambo. And so they're all kind of, so the slave, an enslaved African, was just part of like the stock that was there, the livestock. Now, the truth of the matter is that my ancestors were not animals. And what you needed then is a history that talked about how they almost retained their humanity through dance, through the way they cooked, the way they dressed. And there's a whole social history. Religion as well. Everything coming in and that history is important so that people could understand that, and also how that influenced the present. And so when I noticed that they were doing that history in the Caribbean, so, and also how they resisted slavery. That's the key thing. Because if you were just an animal, then you just accept it, but you weren't. So knowing about Sam Sharp and all these other people, so there's a constant resistance to slavery as well. So what you have then is not dodging it, But actually, and you don't dodge also the fact that the British made loads of money and exploited people, and you don't just dodge the horrors of it. But you also talk about that piece of the humanity inside that. And I think that's the key way in which you then bring that through, so that you end up with a very proud people because they've been, you've seen the legacy of it, And you do end up with a history that shows you, the ways in which that community was pressured, but also you end up seeing how they were involved in their own emancipation. And the thing that slavery couldn't take away from them was their imaginations and their minds, and that was the key element that they taught. So I think that back to that teacher, yes, but if you were just dodging. He didn't have the resources or the kind of sense of how to teach that piece. So he thought, oh, what I better do? I better not hurt the kids teaching them slavery. Let me go back and go for some Wakanda sort of thing where we're all kind of some kind of and little does he know that even although Africa has its kingdoms and its and its great architecture. They also had issues, because they're real people, It's not a wonderland, So,
well, you talk about pre-slavery. Actually, Middle Eastern slave traders took more Africans out of Africa than the white colonizers did. History is complicated, man.
It is.
That's what it is, right? Yeah. And that's how you got to teach it.
One of the things that people misunderstood sometimes or misunderstand is that if you teach the humanity within the inhumanity, that somehow that glorifies slavery, which it doesn't.
No.
What you're doing is you're saying, wow, what a people that actually did, endure this and actually retained their humanity inside this. And that's important, particularly for Black Caribbean kids to understand that, So when they come to that period, it's not just, yes, the slave ships there, yes, people were raped and whatever, but at the same time, what else went on? And the Caribbean got that history, that social history. So that person, Sambo, is no longer a kind of derogatory name who was an animal, but it's a real person.
Yeah.
It's a very positive message to end the conversation on. Tony, thank you so much for coming back. I would really appreciate it. And I think that the nuance with which you have the conversation, actually, just on a personal level, I'm very inspired by the positive and optimistic approach you have. So much of the discussion around these issues is so negative, not focused on finding a solution. People just want to tear the whole thing down and not look to actually improve people's lives. So I commend you for that. And congratulations. I hope, as you say, you hold the government's feet to the fire, get them to implement the recommendations. And look, if it's not enough, there'll need to be another report and more recommendations to be made, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. And we always finish with the last question. Before some questions from our patrons, our locals patrons, is what is the one thing we're not talking about, but we really should be?
Oh, right. Right. What you should be talking about now, I suppose, is, I would say what we should be talking about now is class. We should be talking about poverty and class. That's what we should be talking about. Not denying race, but we should also be talking about, don't forget poverty and class, because those are the real key drivers, I think. And if we can get over, if we can have that conversation more and more, I think we will find that we're beginning to we'll find solutions to some of these things that take us in a different place than we are at the moment.
Well said, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back, and thank you guys for watching. We will see you very soon with another brilliant interview like this one.
See you soon, and take care, guys. We hope you've enjoyed this incredible interview. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell button so that you never miss another fantastic episode.
And if you believe that the work we do here at TRIGGERnometry is important, support us by joining our locals community using the link below.